Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Wyoming Public Media's Town Hall. I'm Bob Beck from Wyoming Public Radio, and we have a good panel of guests today. We're going to be talking quite a bit about how COVID-19 impacted the business world. This is our second town hall. COVID-19 impact on Wyoming's economy is the topic, and we would like to hear from you, and you can talk to all of our guests and ask questions and certainly give us your insights as well. You can simply put your comments on Facebook there, and we will get those and the questions to our folks. Let me introduce who we have with us today. Chris Brown, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Lodging and Restaurant Association. Amber Pollock, who's the co-founder and owner of Backwards Distillery, president of Engage, empowering the next generations for advance and growing the economy, and also a city council member up in Casper. Scott Larson, Executive Director of Visit Laramie and Albany County Travel and Tourism. And Ann Alexander is a professor in economics. She's the Vice Provost for Strategic Planning and Initiatives at the University of Wyoming. First off, thanks to all of you for joining us today. And as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about what the impacts were. And Ann, you're the economist here, so the perfect person to start with. Let's hear from you. What did you see? It sounds like things were really bad at first, but maybe improved when I look at the recent consensus revenue estimating group numbers. But what's the real picture as far as you can tell?
Well, I mean, going into the pandemic, Bob, we had a pretty healthy labor force participation rate. We had a healthy unemployment rate. Both of those things took a pretty big hit during the early days of the pandemic. And as you point out, some of the indicators at the high level are looking a little bit better. The Craig report shows probably a little bit more rosy picture than we were expecting maybe a year ago. However, I would say one thing that is kind of a red flag to me is that we still have a lower labor force participation rate now than we did before the pandemic. And I think some of our colleagues in leisure and hospitality can attest to some of the labor shortages that they are facing now because of that. But we were up at verging on about 66% labor force participation rate before the pandemic. And now we're verging down towards 64%. And that doesn't count people who have actually just left the labor force as well. So that's one of the red flags that I see out there. I think some of the green shoots that we see with respect to revenues coming into the state government, those are probably what I would say short-term abeyances to a continued long-term problem that we're going to see in state revenues. But I think the biggest challenges right now are that there are supply chain problems continuing that are also for the labor force, labor shortages. So it's not, I'm an economist, I'm supposed to bring you all the bad stuff. So there you go, Bob. That's my high level view of it.
I'm going to work my way over to Amber if I can. And Amber, you're a small business person, and being on the city council and Engage and all that, you're certainly familiar with what at least people in your community are talking about. What's going on with labor there, and how big of an issue is this, and will this turn around, do you think?
Well, I think Ann hit it on the head. Revenues may be looking better than we thought, but I think small businesses are still facing lots of challenges in other areas. So I personally, in our business, we're fortunate that we are fully staffed and have had good success there. But I don't think that that's the case for all businesses. I think that I'm hearing a lot around town about folks really struggling in that area, struggling to find people, struggling to retain people. You see multiple businesses that have had to reduce hours. Even ours, we're still working on reduced hours at this point. So we are open, we are operating, but we are not back up to our full amount of hours that we were offering pre-pandemic. So I think that's a struggle statewide. I've seen it statewide. I've seen it certainly here in the community, and hard to say when it will turn around, because it's I think that we may have mitigated some of the most immediate impacts of COVID-19 here in the state, but it seems to me that small businesses are still going to be riding a lot of, ripple effect waves for a good long while here.
Is, the situation in Casper, we hear so much about all the COVID numbers, and does that make people still hesitant to go out and shop and do the things they normally do?
I can say anecdotally, yes, just based on our sales. I look at, generally people are at least on social media talking about how, they're not worried, they're not living in fear, all these things that you hear, but I have revenue to show that when case numbers are high, our revenues are down. And so that indicates to me that there are at least some people who are changing behaviors based on what our case numbers are looking at like at any given time. So when our numbers were looking very good earlier in the summer, we were seeing lots more people coming out. And when we started to have some significant spikes and situation at Wyoming Medical Center was not looking so positive, certainly seeing less people coming out, at least to our business.
Chris, we had a chance to visit a few months ago, and I think I could summarize by saying you pretty much thought 2020 was an absolute disaster. And as we look at now, have things improved? I hear about increased tourism numbers, which we'll have Scott talk a little bit about here in just a second. But is it better, or are there still a lot of issues out there?
Bob, I would say it's both, to be honest with you. Certainly the volume of not only visitors coming to the state has been solid, but the volume of folks wanting to travel or wanting to go out and dine at a restaurant has been robust. Most of the members that I've spoken with, big restaurants, small bed and breakfast, etc., have reported that sales have been real solid through the course of the summer, which is, of course, welcome. As Amber just mentioned, the real challenge has been workforce. And it's important to note that the workforce challenge that we're dealing with is not something that is unique to Wyoming. It's something that the entire country is dealing with. This pandemic has been one of extreme unpredictability. Every time we seem to think that we get past a certain hurdle, a new hurdle seems to present itself. I would agree with Amber. I don't see an end on the immediate horizon to the labor shortage right now. I don't have the answers to that right now. And in talking with my colleagues nationally, they don't either. And then you have this supply chain issue. Anyone that's gone out to eat in the past couple of months has noticed that one of their favorite things is unavailable at the restaurant. Or I got a notification yesterday that my kid's school is short on milk because of supply chain issues. And so it's better, Bob, from a sense of businesses are open. We're grateful to be. We have customers coming in the doors, and that is all great and going in the right direction. But the perpetual workforce challenges and now the supply chain issues are still presenting pretty significant hurdles to the industry.
Scott, let's go local and talk about Laramie. What are you seeing here?
Sure. I mean, from our seat and from what we've seen locally, the travel rebound has been incredibly strong. I mean, we've seen numbers that are off the charts, and I think that's largely reflective of the fact that it's interesting. People are almost willing to travel no matter the cost this year. And we've certainly seen that. They're just so desperate to get out. We're fortunate to have an abundance of wide open spaces, not only in Albany County, but across the state. I think what has maybe been a hamstrung issue for us is I'm a firm believer in making hay while the sun is shining and never taking the demand that we have right now for granted. That being said, how much is too much when you've got a business that's struggling for staffing or struggling to provide the materials that they need? We're very eager to support the economic rebound from a travel standpoint in the state, but you almost run into issues where you don't want to put a business in a position where there's too many people seeking what they offer because they just can't meet the demand. So it's almost like we've hit this ceiling in a way as we try and support that rebound. But from our standpoint, it's been a very strong year from an economic and travel standpoint.
Want to mention to our viewers that if you have a question or a comment of any sort, and we certainly would love to hear some comments, love to read those as well, you can go ahead in the chat function on Facebook, submit those, and they will get it to me and the rest of the group, and we can ask some questions. We did have a listener who earlier submitted a question and said, could somebody speak to the importance of shopping small with locally owned businesses and the role it plays in our economic recovery? And you want to start there with that one?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really fundamental component of economic health for a state like Wyoming, to support Shop Small campaign and support your local businesses. I know during the height of the pandemic, one of the things that Laramie Main Street did was really focus on trying to assist our downtown and other small businesses here by creative campaigns that were very probably similar to other Main Street communities across Wyoming, which was things like, buy gift certificates, buy things that you can use later, put money into pockets of local merchants right now. And so that is absolutely critical, because the vast majority of our businesses here in Wyoming have 50 or fewer employees. And so they are the bread and butter and the heart and soul of the economy, really, on a day-to-day basis.
I suppose, Amber, you'd like to comment on that as well, being in that world.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this is a really, it's a great question and comment, because we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, when we had to shut down, like, our community came out in force. They were doing things like buying gift certificates. They were pretty much whatever we could try to sell them at that moment. They were buying from us because they knew how important it would be to keeping us in business. And I attribute, the fact that we're still here to community support and to the state programs, various state programs that were set up to help small businesses. It's really the only reason we still exist as a business today. But I would just mention that we're going to need some of that enthusiasm to be sustained through this period. We're not shut down anymore, but we're not out of the woods either. And so I think, especially as we're coming into the gift giving season, when folks are purchasing more than they might purchase in an average month, this is going to be a really critical holiday season for small businesses in the state, because we've had a couple holiday seasons that were not so good. And so I think that, really trying to muster some of that same enthusiasm they had at the beginning of the pandemic to help our small businesses, giving some focus to that for this holiday season would be tremendously helpful to all of the small businesses across our communities in Wyoming.
Scott, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I don't have any hard numbers necessarily when we talk about Shop Small, but we definitely, and for the last few years, have really tried to strengthen our partnership with our downtown district and Main Street program. I wish I had my colleague Trey Sherwood. She'd be able to speak to this as well.
She's busy today.
I know, just a few things going on, right? But we've tried really hard to, partner with them and really leverage our megaphone as the DMO and our reach with our audience, not just locally, but also, we've got a lot of communities nearby that love to drive and vacation here. And so how do we encourage them to spend while they're here as well, to keep those businesses afloat and keep people coming in?
Chris, not everybody has a large population area like Amber has, or home football games like we've enjoyed here in Laramie. So how are the other places going to manage, and what have you seen, and what can you share there?
Well, Bob, if you don't mind, I want to add one comment to the last topic as well. And that is, when we're talking about shopping small, shopping locally, I want to emphasize the shopping locally piece to that. I think it's important to note that even though a local restaurant may have a nationally recognized brand as its as its company, it's important to remember that the employees in that business are local residents and that business plays an important role in the local economy. And so I feel more strongly about shop and patronize locally versus determining between larger and smaller businesses. As far as how does the rest of the state, that doesn't have a major attraction like a big college football game or Cheyenne Frontier Days goes, that is, from my perspective, the best way we as a state can grow the state's second largest industry. I think everybody on this panel knows that hospitality and tourism is the state's second largest industry, and under normal circumstances contributes more than $200 million in local and state sales tax revenue to our overall picture. And so it really is the task of the local destination marketing organizations like the one Scott runs. All 23 counties have a local option lodging tax that is tasked with promoting the unique assets of that community. And so continuing to invest in and bolster local advertising and continuing to develop tools for local communities to show off their assets that maybe are a little less well known to those folks. I mean, as a state, we're always going to lead with our hooks. There's no question that people are primarily coming to the state because of the national parks at the during the busy visitor season. But every one of the communities along the way to those national parks has incredible assets to offer. And so continuing to promote locally so folks on the road understand the assets along the way really is the best opportunity for us to continue to spread tourism out and gives us really the best opportunity to grow the visitor economy on a statewide basis.
Again, we are in a town hall talking about COVID-19 impacts on businesses. If you have a question for any of our guests or a comment, we would like to certainly hear from you. This was one from a viewer ahead of our discussion today. Why do you think the leaders who hold purse strings thought a one-time financial infusion would fix the economy, especially as we sit on over $1 billion of aid that's not going to small businesses, but is sitting in the state's piggy bank? Who would like to be the first to grab that one? Chris.
I'll start, Bob. The aid that was provided to businesses in 2020 was an absolute lifeline to many small businesses across the state. It's important to remember, and I hate to use a phrase that was overused probably during it, but we really were building the plane in flight throughout the pandemic. No one alive had ever seen anything like this, and decisions needed to be made in a rapid fashion. The fact that Congress was able to make decisions and get funding out the door as rapidly as they did, and then our governor, our legislature, and the Wyoming Business Council were able to get those funds to small businesses as quickly as they were able to, was incredible. And it played the role that it played can't be overstated as to the lifeline it provided Wyoming businesses. I think that at the time, folks have never dealt with something like this. And so they thought, okay, aid is out, let's get through this. But this pandemic has proven to be continuously challenging. The issues I talked about before, workforce, supply chain, who knows what's next. And so I'm not sure who thought that one-time aid was going to fix everything, but it would be incorrect to think that it didn't play as big of a role as it did. It was a true lifeline.
Scott, do you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say to that point too is that, I mean, we were fortunate at a lot of the work that Chris and his team did with regards to the CARES Act and the support that we were able to get for some relief marketing last year. I think, as most of you probably know, we're funded by a lodging tax, and I think our collections last year were down somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20%. We budgeted for much less than that out of an abundance of caution. But the support that we received for relief marketing, for pushing open spaces and keeping the money flowing through the state, using outdoor recreation and wide open spaces almost as that hook, but then encouraging them to spend money other places while they were here, was invaluable, and certainly not a one-time fix, at least in my opinion. But I think we'd be in a very different place right now if we hadn't had access to that money last year. And there's been another round this year, which has been another blessing for us. So Chris and his teams deserve a lot of credit for that, but it's been a huge asset for us to have that from a travel rebound standpoint.
Amber?
Sure. Two thoughts, and along the lines of what has already been said. I think that my business would be closed without a doubt today for good if we didn't have the programs that were created on the fly, as Chris said, to get money immediately to small businesses. I have no doubts about that. And I think if you look around the country, you see in places that maybe didn't have as much money to go around or didn't have the mechanisms created quickly enough, you see lots of boarded up windows, you see lots of shuttered businesses. And I think that we escaped some of those most dramatic immediate effects to businesses because of the programs that were created. So I mean, I can't say enough about like how important that was and the strategy that was used to get money out to businesses quickly. It made all the difference for us. I will say to the commenter's point, though, I think it would be a mistake to think that we are out of the woods and that further support and additional thought about where do we go next is not needed. I think of it a little bit like triage, like we got through the most immediate emergency, but I think that the lasting impacts are going to be with us for a long time. And so to think about how do we recover completely more quickly is the real next question. And it's hard to think about that when we still have issues compounding on themselves right now. So we're not even through the issues to think about recovery. We're still managing issues that are new ones that are coming our way, sort of in waves. And so I think it would be a mistake to think that one-time money is that we're done now and that we can just, carry on. But the one-time money was important for sure.
And can I twist this a little bit and ask you a little bit of a different question? As I mentioned at the start, you're an administrator at the University of Wyoming that had to undergo a lot of budget cuts at the same time. Because of COVID, there was limited attendance and it's already affected your enrollment going into this year. Can you talk a little bit about how that has impacted you and sort of how the situation looks here now?
Yeah, our enrollments, as were enrollments all across the nation from 2-year schools to 4-year universities, was heavily impacted. Part of that, speaking of one-time infusions from the federal government, part of that was mitigated by CARES funding. They came through the state. Part of it was mitigated as well by the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, the HERF fund. And using that, we've been able to support many of our students with the funding to assist them in continuing to pay for their college. And this is true with our community college partners as well. We were able to actually send another round out to students this semester. So that funding has been absolutely critical in keeping the doors open here at UW, quite frankly, as well as across all of higher education. But I think that we still face a bit of a revenue hole because not only did we see enrollment go down, but also because football games, basketball games, all of the other sort of auxiliary functions as well. We didn't sell as much food to our students. We didn't have the income coming into the dorms. We didn't have as many sports events and other kind of theater and dance events. So those have all been really strong headwinds for us to have to manage through to just basically figure out how to backfill some of those missing pieces that we normally have. And I would say, just kind of hooking off of something Amber just said, this is an acute situation. It's a continuing acute situation. It's not over. and its end date is done when the virus decides that it's done. But it's still a very acute situation. There are chronic problems that Wyoming faces that we also need to probably be tackling in a systemic way. But yes, recovery is really difficult when you're not actually through the acute crisis that it drags on and people are tired of it. And it really has impacted our ability to do a lot of things that we were hoping to do here at UW.
Chris, it's got to be the same way in your field as well.
Yeah, it absolutely is. The continuous stream of unexpected challenges has made it very difficult for the industry. Again, the volume of business coming in has been a blessing. Very grateful for that. But then it's still left up to, can businesses take advantage of that? For example, if you're running a busy restaurant and the busiest time each night is from, say, 6 o'clock to 8:30, and you're running on a third of the staff you typically have, can you process as many customers through during that busy time? And so I would agree with the previous speaker that unfortunately, we're not out of this yet. The industry is incredibly resilient and will continue to rise to the challenge, but we could use a break in the steady stream of challenges coming down the pipe.
I would love to ask you guys about this, and Amber, I'm going to start with you, as you talked about looking forward, where are we headed? And one of the challenges that strikes me, we talk so much about diversifying our economy, and I know there's all kinds of continued discussion about that. And Amber, you've been very actively involved in that. But if we're having a little trouble with supply chain and we're having a little trouble with finding employees, is that even a realistic possibility anytime in the near future?
Well, I think that it's a difficult question. I mean, it's again, while we're still in this situation, it's hard to talk about diversifying our economy when we're just trying to keep the economy we have on the tracks. And so I do think it's a possibility. There are many economic sectors that don't need as much labor force as hospitality, that don't need, hospitality is a labor heavy industry. So there are other sectors that would not be facing the exact same challenges that hospitality is facing right now, and tourism. Supply chain, though, I think is affecting sort of across sectors, and that is that's I don't see that problem resolving itself anytime soon. So it's a difficult question to grapple with at a time when our existing economy is uncertain, which speaks to the need to try to do this, to try to have those conversations when we're not in an emergency situation, to try to do it more proactively rather than reactively, which is sort of the pattern that we continue to see from the state, in my opinion, right now.
Chris, you've certainly heard these discussions for many years. I mean, your thoughts on that? It just seems like this is going to be a difficult thing to do.
It will be. But as I mentioned in my last comment, the industry is extremely resilient. Working in the hospitality and tourism industry is challenging under normal circumstances. As Amber mentioned, it's very labor intensive. And so I have every confidence that the industry will continue to rise up and conquer these challenges as they come down the pipe. I don't have answers on the horizons, and nor do my colleagues nationally on the most pressing things right now as far as labor and supply chain go. But I know that we'll be able to rise up and meet these challenges as they continue to come down the pipe.
Scott, any thoughts from you?
I would echo the comments that Amber and Chris both made, but the other thing I definitely think that is worth noting here is and maybe this is a bright spot or a source for optimism because I'm an optimist, but I am really excited about the work that the University of Wyoming is doing, both with their Hobbs School degrees and that program, the ORTM program. I think that's going to start. I know that's a slow process and you've got to move people through that pipeline, but I do think that that will aid the state of Wyoming as we talk about workforce and diversifying our economy and plugging more people into those hospitality type jobs. I do view that as a bright spot. It's certainly not a quick fix. It does take time, but I do think that's going to aid us in the long run.
I tread lightly on this a little bit, Ann, because I know there's certainly some conversation going on, but I know the university is taking an approach that it has taken in the past, but then sometimes has not, but where you're really looking at jobs and trying to help the economy right now. I know the community colleges in particular have been tasked with taking a look at jobs and creating more things. So that question along on top of some of the things that we just heard Scott mention, is there hope for the future? Can we create some things when we've got some of these challenges?
Yeah, Bob, what I'd say is that diversification is a long game, and it's something that we have to focus on, whether good times are here or bad times. It's really hard to focus on when good times are here, unfortunately. But it's important for us to do it all the time. I think that some of the things that folks have been hearing about coming out of the reorganization proposal here at UW includes some really, I think, as Scott just pointed out, the ORTM degree, the Outdoor Recreation Tourism Management degree, as well as standing up a center that's called the Wyoming Outdoor Recreation Tourism Hospitality Center, a Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, a School of Computing. These are all long game supporters for well-paid jobs that will allow people to stay in Wyoming should they choose to when they graduate. About 70% of our graduates at UW end up leaving the state, and that's a big outflow. And if we just edged up next to Montana's retention rate post-graduation, we keep about 400 more students every year, and that seems doable to me. And some of them could start businesses, and some of them could go to work in our second largest sector, and they could also help us diversify the economy. But all of that, I think that there's another thing that underpins on the infrastructure side, and that is that our infrastructure needs a lot of work too. Particularly in Wyoming, our connectivity as far as broadband is pretty, that's a headwind right there. So diversification into other areas would be important as far as income goes for our state. But we're going to face headwinds there if we don't have good connectivity, and it's not going to do anything to solve our state budget problems. So.
Your university, along with what you're doing in hospitality and tourism, is also doing some things in entrepreneurism. Is that moving ahead, and what's your read on how that's going?
That is moving ahead. So we have a lot of really good pockets of work that's been going on for several years to support entrepreneurship and innovation. But we have a dedicated center that was just started like within the past 3 months. And so that is going to probably be a game changer, because it's going to bring together folks across campus, efforts across campus, but also serve as a front door for our business community and nonprofit community to help in exploring everything from tech transfer and IP all the way to basic business support through our business resource network. So which includes, of course, the Wyoming Business Council. So I actually have a lot of optimism about that particular center, as well as the Wyoming Outdoor Recreation Tourism Hospitality Center, WORTH. I'll just call it that from now on because it's faster. And I have some optimism about the School of Computing too, as far as supporting good, livable wage jobs.
Again, if any of our viewers have a question for our panelists, go ahead and submit it in the chat, and we will get it. I want to ask one that we got a little bit earlier. So there was, as we've talked about, there was a lot of tourism in the state. Chris, any read on whether that's been bringing people, or at least making people interested in coming to Wyoming, and have they taken advantage of the visit here to maybe set up shop and change their minds about the state?
Well, that is always one of the ancillary benefits of tourism is that folks come to the state and realize how beautiful it is and say, hold on a second, we've got a great business climate here. It's not as expensive to live here as it is in other states. And so anecdotally, I can say, yes, I think that we saw a significant influx of folks during the pandemic, largely because of our wide open spaces and the ability to spread out. I think that at the height of the pandemic, folks were less inclined to live in more congested areas and were seeking more of a spread out, open air environment. But yes, Bob, I do feel like when folks do come to Wyoming and they visit and see how beautiful our state is and all those other benefits I mentioned, that there is some benefit. I don't have a percentage that I can give you, but overall, yes, I do think that there is some benefit.
Scott?
Yeah, I would echo some of what Chris said, and I don't have any hard numbers, but what I will tell you is that, I mean, from a number of well, first of all, we saw visitation go through the roof last year, and we've continued to see that rise this year, which I think has been good for our economic rebound. But through a number of the different surveys that we distribute, I can tell you for sure that we definitely saw people come in last year and this year who are location neutral and are looking to do the work remote thing. We've got a great quality of life, low cost of living, work-life balance, and it's been great for those folks to set up shop. And whether they're just passing through and living out of the van or whether they're working from a hotel room, we've definitely seen an increase there. And I know that we had a number of new businesses open up downtown during the pandemic as well. So I don't have any hard stats for you, but I definitely think that we've seen a little bit of lift in that department as a result of what happened last year.
Amber, what have you seen? Anything along those lines?
Yeah, similar sorts of things. I've had folks coming into the tasting room. I think the interest in moving here is high for a variety of reasons. And some folks, asking me about permitting and asking me about, different regulations. I want to open a cigar shop. Like, who do I need to talk to? And so certainly some interest there. Again, whether or not that is helpful to the state's revenue picture is questionable, I think. But I do think that there's certainly interest. It's on people's radars in ways that it hasn't been in the past, I think.
Can I ask you, Amber, since I've got you talking right now, the legislature is talking about COVID-19 and vaccination mandates and whether or not we should fine people who have those, that kind of thing. What's your take on that? You wear a lot of hats in this conversation. Could that be detrimental to the people in the state? I'm just sort of curious your thoughts.
Well, it's a loaded question, I think, Bob. I think it can be both. I think that the whole issue is so polarized. For some people, they would see that as a positive and a reason to want to be here, and for some people, they would see it as a negative and a reason to not want to be here. I personally, for my business, I think that it's a gross overreach to tell me how, I need every tool at my disposal right now that I can possibly get to keep my business open and operating. So for them to suggest that taking a tool away is a good idea, I think it's super counterproductive right now. I think that businesses need to be able to do what they need to be able to do, because so many businesses are teetering, they're on the edge. We're just trying to recover. And my number one priority is to make sure that I can keep my staff employed and keep paying them. And the only way I can do that is if we can stay open. So I think that the legislature inserting themselves in that conversation in a way other than to say, how can we support you best in doing that, is inappropriate.
Any thoughts from you, Chris?
Bob, I think that the best people to be making decision for business is the owner of that business. I think that we are a state that generally does not care for mandates. And so I can't understand how additional mandates and regulation to fight mandates and regulations seems like the right path to go. I don't believe two wrongs make a right. And I believe the decisions, as Amber just alluded to, the decisions that are best for each of those individual businesses should be made by those leading those businesses. They know what's best for their business and their employees.
Here's a question that did prompt a question from one of our viewers. This is from Jeff. We rank first in COVID deaths per population ratio. We're not vaccinated, not wearing masks. How is this good for the economy? Who wants to jump on that first? Go ahead, Amber.
It's not.
It's not. Okay. Chris?
I agree that it's absolutely not good for our economy. It is extremely unfortunate that this pandemic was hyper politicized from the very beginning. I wish personally that we could have stood more unified in combating this as a state and as a country, but the toothpaste is long out of the tube, as they say. But Amber hit the nail on the head with her simple answer. It's terrible for our economy.
Scott, want to weigh in?
You know, I don't know that I have anything additional to add, but I guess what I would say that I think has been interesting as I've been on the road a ton this last month in a lot of different states and looked at how different cities and states have approached that essential question. And looking at those numbers, I do think it's interesting from a travel standpoint to look at those states that have been much more hands-off when it comes to regulation and how their economies have rebounded versus those that have seemed to have been more hands-on and how those economies have rebounded. Not to say one is right or wrong, but I think that the way Wyoming handled it seems to have worked out at this point compared to some other places that I've been recently, for sure, that are still very, very much in the trenches.
And you're the economist. What are you seeing? What is it telling us? I mean, is this bad for our economy? Or what are we seeing?
Well, what I would say is that in the whole sort of framing discussion, as Chris pointed out, the polarization around public health has been quite unhealthy for the economy. There might have been significant overreaction at the beginning. However, it was very, very difficult for us to know at that time whether shutting down was an overreaction because we knew so little about the virus. But in all of this, I think the most important thing to remember is that the virus is the enemy, not our fellow citizens. The virus is the enemy. And so whatever we can do to combat the virus is going to get our economy back on track. Every time there is a pandemic, whether it's this pandemic or previous ones, there's a significant contraction in economic growth. And that can come from high mortality rates, and it can come from having to respond very in a harsh way, which is what we did at the beginning. But again, that was primarily because we didn't know enough about the virus. I think we know so much about the virus now, how it transmits, what is best to combat it. And so the virus is the enemy.
Again, if you have a question for our group or a comment, you can certainly put it down. And this is a comment, but I think it can be easily turned into a question. This is from Barb. Unless the state is willing to update its tax code, I don't see how having new people, businesses locate to the state is beneficial to the state as a whole. With COVID still rampant, I continue to shop mostly online or in Colorado where I feel safer, and I certainly am more likely to eat at a restaurant in Fort Collins than in Cheyenne. Thanks for the comment. What I do want to go back to and ask you about and start with you on this one, Ann, is the tax code. This is one we've been talking about for some time. They've kicked tires on the tax code and nothing ever gets accomplished. What changes could help the state and what, you've looked at this, what should they be at least considering?
Well, it's a fair point. We did, the USPS has data that shows that we had net gain in movers to the state during the pandemic. As everybody pointed out, there sure felt like we did, and we did. But you've heard me say this before, Bob, if the intergalactic headquarters of Google came here, they wouldn't pay their way when it came to schools, when it came their way to highways and so on and so forth. It's simply because our tax structure isn't conducive to it. So we have a tax structure right now where what we get from state governments is paid for by a very small number of people. We've put the burden on a very narrow set of shoulders for a very long time. And it's not to say I love taxes. I don't want to pay more taxes personally, but I also know that I like my roads to not have potholes, and I like our infrastructure to be functional. And so at the very least, we have to look at how we're going to fund those baseline government services going forward, not expecting that our energy companies pay for all of us to have our infrastructure and our government services that we rely on.
Amber, thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, the commenter is right. I alluded to it earlier. I think that until we have a tax structure that is more broad across variety of industries and sectors, people moving here to work remotely doesn't really generate enough taxes to offset the expense of having them here. Businesses moving here that are outside of the extracted industry doesn't really generate enough taxes to offset the cost of having them here. So, ultimately, until we create a more broad tax structure, we won't benefit from a diversified economy. So what I'd like to see is a more broad structure that allows us to benefit more from the diversity we already have and capitalize on additional diversification that can come from some of these new things that we have seen interest in other people moving here, interest in remote workers, that sort of thing. I think that setting up a tax structure that really helps us capitalize on these assets that we have is the direction we need to head, and makes the most sense for what our economy looks like moving into the future.
And as you've worked on Engage and you've talked about new businesses and that sort of thing, one of the things that you always hear about Wyoming is we've had this low tax structure. And I heard former Governor Friedenthal talk on one of the business forums not too long ago, is like, what good has that really done us when we're continuing to have these conversations about diversifying the economy? Would a more stable tax base, what the taxes are going to be, and we just have this reform and we finally get it resolved, do you think that would help grow the economy? Because one of the things that I've heard from folks in my reporting is this up and down conversation and uncertainty has not helped anything.
Yeah, I think businesses can't plan if they don't have some reasonable way to project what the picture is going to look like. And when we have the absolute bulk of our state revenue based on a volatile industry, it makes it really difficult for people to get a sense of what is the economic picture in Wyoming going to look like if I move my business there in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. And businesses need to be able to plan that way. And so I think that businesses are looking for stability, even if it means they have to pay something, right? I mean, most businesses don't pay a heck of a lot of anything to the state revenue in terms of tax. And so I think that I think that the stability is a key component. And I think if having just the lowest tax rate was the answer, our economy would look very different right now than it looks. And so I think the proof is in the pudding. We've got states around us that are running laps around us in terms of development in certain sectors that we have complete ability to be able to develop for our own economies as well. But it's not happening. So I think that there's obviously something missing. And I think that stability is a key piece of it.
Chris or Scott, any thoughts from either one of you? Chris?
I guess, Bob, I would be remiss to not say that hospitality and tourism has been working towards playing a role in the diversification of our tax revenue. We worked very hard to pass the statewide lodging tax in 2020. That was a tax that we had opposed for the history of our organization, now coming up on about 70 years. And not only did that put the state's second largest generator of tax revenue on a much more solid platform to grow hospitality and tourism, but it also reverted $22 million per biennium back to the state's general fund by taking the Wyoming Office of Tourism off of the general fund. And so I realize that doesn't, that's not the silver bullet, but the industry, I feel like, is playing a pretty important role in part of that overall diversification.
Any thoughts from you on this, Scott?
No, I don't know that I have anything additional. I think you guys have all covered it pretty well. I guess the only thing I would add to Chris's comments, right, is that, we're a state with something like 600,000 residents, and we see, I think it was 9 million pre-pandemic visitors a year to the state. And it seems logical to me that we'd try and pull some more money out of those folks as well. So that's all I would really add.
We've just got a few minutes left. If anybody has a question or a comment, put it on Facebook, but I want to start on the process of maybe wrapping up here and perhaps start with you, Scott. As you look ahead to the end of this year, the winter season, and then heading into next year, not only in your own world of tourism and hospitality, but even in the community. I know you're talking with business leaders and folks all the time. What are we looking at? Do you think this is going to start to settle down, or are we in for another year of excitement?
Gosh, I was just talking to somebody about that the other day. I keep coming back to that where we sit right now has to come back down to that trend line at some point, but it certainly doesn't look like it right now. We continue to have the workforce challenges, but I know from talking to some of our big winter economic drivers from a tourism standpoint, a lot of them had record years last year when we didn't even have great snow. And from talking to them, a lot of them are already 50, 75%, some cases double, in terms of pre-bookings going into the winter without even knowing what the snow is going to look like. So barring some sort of catastrophe with the economy, which is always a wild card floating around out there, it looks to us like it's just going to keep on humming, and that's great. We'll continue to take that demand while we've got it and make the most of what we have.
Chris, any thoughts there?
Yeah, Bob, I look to the future with optimism. And that doesn't mean that challenges won't continue to come down the pipe. The ones we're dealing with right now that we've already mentioned, and who knows whatever else new is on the horizon. But having worked in the industry for more than 20 years before taking this position, I know the industry's resilience. I can speak to it firsthand. I think that as folks continue to work back into the workforce, they'll see the incredible amount of opportunity within hospitality, from someone's very first job all the way to a full-blown career in the field. And so, Bob, I think the future is bright. It doesn't mean it won't come without its challenges, but I'm encouraged by the increased visitation to the state. And as the pandemic hopefully begins to wane here in the future, I think you're going to see hospitality and tourism roar to numbers that we haven't seen before.
Chris, I'm going to jump in and ask a question I was just delivered. We were talking about staff shortages earlier and that kind of thing. Any solutions to that you see, like raising the minimum wage or something along those lines?
Well, as it goes with wage, I think you just need to take a drive around town and see the now hiring signs. I mean, I think that just like we said before the pandemic, I think that the market takes care of itself. I mean, I'm seeing entry-level wages for first-time jobs anywhere from $12 to $15 right now already. What I think we need to do as an industry is remarket and rebrand ourselves to remind folks the fun that is a part of our industry as well. When I first started as a disher and a busser and a bartender, those were some of the most fun times of my working career. And I think that we as an industry can do a better job of telling our story and talking about the benefits of being a part of our industry in order to help get that workforce back.
And any thoughts on the minimum wage or wage question at all?
I think it precisely on point to what Chris said. We've seen $16 an hour, $18 an hour kind of jobs that did not used to be those wages. Just recently, we were having trouble finding bus drivers for UW and people to work in our food court at the union. And that's how we're trying to solve it. That doesn't, it doesn't mean that we have a whole flood of people coming into the state to take those jobs. But I think, yeah, it's an interesting idea that was just proposed there, that, to remind people that it is actually quite fun to work in a small business or in hospitality and tourism. I was a maid, and y'all might not think that was a terribly fun job, but man, it actually was. I had a good time. I met a lot of really interesting people at hotels. I was a bus person and so on. So I think that's a really interesting idea. But, I think right now what we're seeing in the labor force is not just a reduction in participation, but people just waiting, right? This uncertainty around everything is just, I can't afford to go to work because I can't afford to pay for childcare. I can't afford to go to work because of X, Y, and Z, or I've just learned a whole lot about myself over the past year and a half, and I'm not sure I want to go back to that industry. There's a lot of swirling that's going to have to happen in the next 2 years before all of this really, I think, starts to settle out, because people are still trying to figure out what they want to do post-pandemic with their careers, with their jobs. And so I think a minimum wage increase would help. It would certainly recognize the incredibly hard work of people in that sector. But it also would, I don't think it would be the only solution. And I don't think it's the solution that's going to bring a bunch of people back into the labor force. I think only time is going to do that.
And again, I was a dishwasher at a convent, and I am not kidding about that. That was my first job. I didn't find that as fun as some of the rest of you. So anyhow, back to that, would ask you that question we had asked a second ago, man. Looking to the future, this is something that's going to take a minute to work itself out.
It's going to take a hot minute at least. Probably a lot of the best modelers out there are showing that it's going to be at least a couple of years before this stuff starts to work itself out. The supply chain problems are probably going to clear up faster than the labor issue is going to clear up, but there's still, both of those are going to take an immense amount of time. So,
okay, Amber.
Yeah, I think that my closing thoughts are similar to other folks. I think that, the thing that we have going for us is that community support is still really strong for our businesses. Visitor support is still really strong, maybe stronger than ever for our businesses. And so I think that is the great news. And, I don't know if that'll be enough to help businesses weather through the next couple of years as all of these things are settling down. I do think we need to continue to be on the lookout for solutions and for ways to support and continue to think proactively and creatively about how we tackle some of this stuff. I think that, again, I think it'd be a mistake to think that like we're good to go and it'll just work itself out, without any intervention. I'm not sure if that's completely true, or businesses may need support mechanisms to get through these other sort of adjacent challenges. But we do have people coming in the doors, businesses are open, so that's a really good thing. I think for our business specifically, supply chain is getting really scary, and so I think keeping a really keen eye on that and making sure that as Scott said earlier, our businesses can actually take advantage of this support. If you don't have a product to deliver and you don't have people to deliver it, that's really difficult to do. So I think continuing to work on that, look at it holistically, and make sure that we have support mechanisms in place to deal with those and any other challenges that might come up in between, then and now, I think is where we need to have our sights set.
Well, thanks to all of our viewers for joining us, and thanks to all of you for joining us. Thanks for getting me to think about Sister Delima, who I haven't thought about in a long time. Chris Brown, Ann Alexander, Scott Larson, Amber Pollock, a pleasure having all of you. We're going to have another one of these coming up, I believe, next month. We'll get you the details and advertise that. And thanks to everyone.
Thanks very much.